Your powered speaker by default out of the box is designed for plugging a microphone into, not for blasting music through. So if you can get a little equalizer or one of the older drive rack DSP units that you can go in, you can set a crossover, and you can set an EQ, and you can kind of tame some of the higher frequencies so you're not hurting people's ears. There's certain frequencies, especially in dance music, that fatigue your ears. A lot of that is 1.5K, about the 2.8K range, and then the 4 to 8K. You want to kind of dip a little bit, so just depending on the material, because that high frequency will just, after a while, you won't necessarily notice it because it fatigues slowly over time. Something I do when I'm doing larger concerts, I'll have a real-time analyzer that will show me what the frequency spectrum looks like, but I'll set it on infinite, so it never resets, so it's showing me over time. And if all of a sudden, and if I don't have a flat plateau, and I have a little peak, say around 2K or 3K, I don't necessarily can't hear that because I've been listening to loud music for a long time. But I can say, oh, this is actually fatiguing my audience's ears, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. I mean, it depends on the speaker, but generally around like 1.5, 2.8, and around 4 to 8K is the areas you want to. It really depends on the type of music you're playing.
Yeah. Or 1.5 to 5K. That band. Because you still specified 3 bands, but really it's all of those frequencies, right?
Yeah, although if you just take a bell filter, which is like a parametric, just like if you're turning the treble down in your car or whatever, you might as well turn the volume down and just turn your subs up at that point. Because if you could do like broad adjustments like that, it's just better off than trying to notch out and cut up your frequency band.
Maybe you can just sort of explain what are all the different things that you might use a sound processor for.
All right, let me know if I'm getting too technical here. We have a sound source, so let's just say that's a DJ mixer, right? And the most basic setup is I have a pair of speakers on stands. And that's it. Okay? So I have no control over what's going on. I'm completely relying upon the sound coming out of the speaker. So what you can do, just like on your home stereo or whatever, you have an EQ unit. And with this, you can control the tonality of what's going on in the speakers. You can't necessarily control the level or adjust anything, saying if I go over a certain level, I want to turn it down or play with the dynamics of it all. In Pro Audio, they've taken the sound spectrum, so 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz is about the human hearing range, and they've decided that we're going to divide that up into 1/3 octaves is the most common. So that'll equate out to be a 31 band EQ. So this is called a graphic equalizer. So I have a unit that has 31 little sliders on it, and there's a 0, and I can go plus, let's just say we're plus 12, minus 12. This particular fader will just control 20 hertz. This one over here will be 800 hertz. This one over here of 2K. And there's different center frequencies for that. So you could say, okay, the highs or the treble's too harsh, but this particular band in the treble, I can go in and pop that down, or I can add to it. This is called a graphic equalizer. There's a parametric equalizer. The parametric equalizer is what you have on your DJ mixer. So that is grabbing a range of bands, and on the DJ mixer it's fixed. On sound consoles, whatever, you can adjust where that center point is and how wide the filter is. So in a parametric, I can say, all right, this is 20 hertz, 20 kilohertz, whatever. I want to just dip out starting around 4K with a bell. And I can center that at 4K, and I can say this is going to be negative 6 dB, and this is my width that I can define. And you can move those filters around. There's a lot more to that, but I think that's out of scope of this.
Targeted to, it's not because you're trying to correct the music, it's just trying to make the reproduction in that space good.
Correct, or to correct for the speaker itself.
Yeah.
So a lot of plastic
hardware.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of plastic speakers will have resonances, and there's not much you can do about that. That's just how a plastic speaker is. So you might want to say, like on a QSC K12, you're going to resonate around 280 hertz. So I'll know I'll want to drop that.
Is this why, this is very basic, but is this why in every club you have like another technician at the back?
Generally, yeah.
I've seen them, like, what are they doing? Because they have all these like screens and they're not big. Like, what are they doing?
Right.
And they're actually doing a lot of this.
They're doing a lot of that too. This would be a function that's built into their audio console that the mixer would plug into. So it depends on the venue. If I'm just doing just a DJ show, I usually don't bother with a console. I have a processor that has those functions on it, and I'll plug the DJ mixer into that because these days everything's digital. Again, I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead. I want to avoid as many analog to digital or digital to analog conversions as possible. They introduce latency, they introduce artifacts to the sound. If I'm at different sample rates, you just can kind of do weird things to phase and all of that. So if I can minimize that's definitely better. Say I have these two speakers here, but then I also have two large subwoofers for my low frequency. Everybody understand the difference between a two-way top and a subwoofer? Yeah, okay, cool. So if I just go and connect this like this, these are just jumped through. My subwoofers and my tops are seeing the full frequency range. Now, some speakers have a way to say, hey, it's called a high-pass switch, to ignore that. But what you would normally do is use something called a crossover. So that's a little bit like an EQ, except it's very, very, very steep. So I can say, all right, I have a two-way crossover. I'll have one output. Let's say if this is my frequency band, 20 to 20K. I can have something that looks like this, and then this would go out to my subwoofer, and this would stop at say 85 hertz. And then I have another band that goes to my tops, and that's the rest of this frequency spectrum. So I'm actually shaving off the low end, so the top speakers never see that. If you send low frequencies to say a 12-inch or 8-inch speaker, it'll still try to move, but it's not going to reproduce the sound that an 18-inch or 21-inch subwoofer can. So it's wasted energy, and you can damage the driver. It's way better to let the speaker reproduce the frequencies that it was designed to and it's most efficient for. And you'll use a lot less power, and you'll have just cleaner sound coming out of it. This concept gets even more involved sometimes. So this is what was known as a two-way system. In your powered speaker, I have a low frequency transducer and then a horn or a high frequency transducer of some type. In a powered speaker, there's actually two amplifiers driving this. And there's a separate crossover unit built in, and that's where your input comes into. So it's actually two-way by design if you're using powered speakers. So if these were powered speakers and you had subs, you'd actually have a three-way system. Now these crossovers, like I have a few PAs that are four-way or five-way, meaning I'm quad amping or quadruple amplifying. On your stacks you have super high frequency, then you have high frequency, then you have your mid-highs, your mid-lows, your low-lows, and then your infrabass, which usually like a 21. And when you're doing things like this, everything is going to be out of time because some frequencies are longer than others and cause phase changes and all that, but again, that's beyond this. But going back to Philip said with a processor, a basic thing like a DBX drive rack or a Zilliqa or whatever, it's a little DSP unit. They're usually 1U. They'll have a few inputs and they'll have multiple outputs, and you can in software define what these outputs do. So these will generally have a blockchain of processing that you can have in it. So it'll have some sort of input mixer, it'll have an EQ, compression, and then it will have a crossover that's usually definable, depending on how many speakers you want to put on it. Then you'll have another EQ and a limiter, and then your output. I'm sorry, and then you also have a function for delay, which going back to if sound waves are different lengths. The most basic PA setup, if I have an 18-inch sub, and I have a top on that, just on a pole. This is probably a small PA you're going to come across all the time. If I want to properly time align that so my high frequency reaches at the same time as the low frequency, I need to delay my high frequency a little bit, a couple milliseconds, depending on the size of the cabinets and all that. And I can do that with a processor, so I could just dial in a little bit of delay. I think it's probably going a little bit far ahead. But these are relatively inexpensive now, and I would definitely recommend if you have a small PA and you want to get the most efficiency out of it to pick up one of those.
I do want to mention that some powered speaker systems have built-in DSP that does some of this for you. I think some of the Electro Voice ones definitely
The Electro Voices, yes, they have the functionality of a basic parametric EQ. You usually get 3 bands.
Yeah.
And they have a high-pass filter, meaning I'm going to block any frequencies past the point of that pickup point in the high-pass filter. So I can block low frequencies. So if you plug an external or a sub into it, you could say, hey, just ignore that. And if the sub does that, and you don't necessarily need a processor.
Mm-hmm.
But to have everything in one place and to be able to look at your limiting and all of that, and some of the newer processors too have little iPad apps, so you can walk around and tune your PA, mm-hmm. which is super handy. It's worth it for that. If this is an overhead view of a DJ playing, and I have my DJ monitors here, and then I have my main PA out here. In some rooms, it's beneficial to set the delay of these speakers to this plane here, so that the DJ, when they're hearing slapback or whatever, or even for the audience, they're only hearing one sound source and they're not hearing these speakers compete with each other.
Oh, okay.
So you delay your mains to your monitor line.
So your monitor speakers don't fight with the main system.
Right.
You're actually delaying the main system
to the monitor line, yeah.
But the monitor is the shortest amount of time that you've got.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's something the processor just lets you do, which is kind of nice, and clean up your sound a little bit.